Ladies and gentlemen, we're here with Ken Urquhart. Hopefully I pronounced that right. And this is Theta N. And Ken was one of LRH's closest confidants, was his butler at St. Hill, very close to the family, and has insight that no one else has. So I'm very lucky and pleased to be talking to this man. So Ken, thank you very much for taking the time. We just solved a couple of technical issues, and so we know each other a little bit now.
Yes, you did very well. And thank you for having me. Thank you for that help, and thank you for having me.
Yes, you're welcome. Okay, so let's start a little bit. I know you've written extensively about how you ended up coming to St. Hill and kind of that. So I don't want to beat that horse to death, but I do just want to kind of get a general feel for the beginning for you. So when did you first realize that Scientology was something that you really wanted to pursue? What was that kind of aha moment?
That was my introduction to Scientology, which took place in 1957 in London. I'd left home. I was studying music, and I was in a very bad way personally. I needed help. I was looking at psychology, and it wasn't doing anything for me. I was looking at the church. That was the Church of England, and that similarly wasn't getting anywhere. Then a friend of my father's, and interestingly enough, they had known each other before World War II when they were both members of the Theosophical Society. So that's an interesting connection. Anyway, he lived in, I was in London. He lived out in a place called Bristol. And he wrote to me out of the blue and said that he had paid to go to this meeting in London at a certain weekend, and he'd paid for me to go with him. And he told me it was Scientology, gave me the name and address. I wrote to them and asked them, well, what are you all about? I don't know. They sent me a Certainty magazine, which made no sense at all. But this was an old friend, and he was paying, so I went. And the event was what they called in those days a weekend group auditing intensive. So you went in on the early Saturday morning, and the morning was taken up with an IQ test and the OCA. And after lunch on Saturday, we started the group auditing, and between then and Sunday evening, we had 14 hours in a very crowded room. It was quite a large room. It was the largest room in the org at the time. And I was just shoved right into it. I had no idea what was coming or what I was supposed to do or what was supposed to happen, but some of the things really impressed me. We ended up at least I ended up on the Sunday evening with a bit of a headache, but I felt as though all the cobwebs had been blown out of my mind.
Wow.
So that was very significant.
But that was just from group processing.
Yeah. Well, you say just from group processing, but group processing was very powerful.
And yeah, I know I'm saying just group processing, but I guess what I've experienced at group processing has been like this very diluted 15-20 minute thing that they've done at Sunday,
Yeah.
a chapel, just to pretend.
Yeah.
This is very weak,
Right.
weak
This was
thing.
hour after hour after hour, and sometimes the seat got very hard. Anyway, what really impressed me was the presence of the auditors. We had 3 people auditing us. They took turns. The one was a young fellow called George, and he was a little bit cheeky. And then there was Eileen. I remember Eileen. She wore a pleated dress. I remember I kept looking at her and thinking to myself, she doesn't look like she's wearing anything at all underneath. Anyway,
Who's a cheeky one there, Ken?
Yeah. Well, you know, I was only 19. What else do you think about? And then there was a woman called Joan DeVoe, who really, really impressed me. She was very quiet, but she carried great authority. But what really got me was, see, I was studying music, and one of my great problems was I would have overwhelming stage fright.
Hmm.
And here were these three people standing out in front of a group of strangers, and they were completely self-possessed. They were relaxed, and they were doing what they were doing. And I thought, my God, I want that.
Right.
So that's really what got me hooked. But a little later on, I got more familiar with what was going on. And then when I found out that one of the goals of Scientology was, quote, a civilization of which we can be proud, unquote, I was really hooked.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's how I got started.
No, it's a great story. And it seems I've had several talks with old timers, quote unquote. I guess the people that were there in the 60s and 70s, and they all kind of seem to say the same story where there was no pussyfooting around. Well, back then,
No.
when you entered, you were given the goods. Unlike
Yeah.
today's Div Sixers, it's like, here's how to make your life somewhat less annoying. Those courses are very tame, as opposed to, okay, welcome, you're gonna do this HQS course. Here's your TR start, and given
Right.
the goods. And that seemed to make Scientologists, as opposed to, in my experience as a Div Sixer back in Miami, Org, revolving door. People just come in, take their little how to, annoy your wife less course, be like, oh yeah, that's fine, and leave. Because we're never really given Scientology. They were given a little self-help course. So I just think it's interesting that you also have backed up that kind of realization of mine, that if you just deliver the straight goods, you're going to get results, as opposed to, oh, here's Scientology, a self-help thing. It can help you make a little bit more money. I say go for it. Let's deliver the objectives, the hard way. TRs are hard way.
Yeah.
Whatever else is part of the HQS or the HAS or whatever, and stop messing around, or else we're
Yeah.
not
You
going
got to
to.
be real.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you for that, because you just validated that little assertion.
Right.
Um, here's kind of a broad general question, and you're gonna have to scan, I guess, your past 4 years or so. But what was your single, up to now, your biggest win or cognition in Scientology?
There were many, 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 many. I don't know. It's hard to think of one that stands out more than another or the others.
Was it a gradual, um cogniting that you were a spiritual being and that you had, there was more to life, or was there a moment? For me, it was one big moment. It was when I went clear. And I went
Right.
clear my first free auditing session at book one in Miami, York. It was a 2.5 hour session, and the auditor did not do anything fancy. Just earlier, similar, earlier, similar, earlier, similar. And I went where I went, and boom,
Right.
boom, that was it.
Yeah.
And then there was, after that, there was a more gradual wins, but there was that one singular moment for me. Was it like that for you, or was it kind of just like a gradual
It
awakening?
was it was a gradual series of mind-blowing wins. I mean, the very first one that blew me away happened on a TR's course, a com course.
Okay.
And at that particular time, it was run permissively. The standard was not very high.
Okay.
And I was coaching an old lady. I could almost remember her name. And she was doing just fine. And I was observing her. She was doing her TR0. I didn't have any reason to flunk her. And I'm just watching her face. And I'm observing that she has very nice skin. I'm admiring that. And then I admire how smooth her forehead is. And I'm thinking, well, you know, just behind her, that skin on her forehead is the bone of her forehead. And then I'm thinking, well, behind that bone is her brain. And as I thought that, her forehead disappeared. And I was looking at her brain.
Wow.
And my immediate reaction was, oh dear, what have I done? It's going to get cold and get germs and all that. So the forehead went back immediately.
Yes.
Then the next real big thing was, during that period, I was, well, since the age of about 17, I think, I used to get dreadful pains in my head. And I think they were what they call cluster headaches, very similar to migraine, unbearable pain. And one day, I'd been in Scientology a year or more. The pain was so bad, I called the HASI, that's the organization in London, and said, I'm desperate. So they gave me a weekend intensive with an auditor, and it didn't do anything. So I said, no, I need more. And they said, well, we can only give you one of these emergency assists. That's the policy. But I begged them, and they gave me another one. And in that second weekend of emergency assist, the thing blew. And I never had that pain again ever after.
That's incredible. And this is one of the things I do also want. I wish there was a way to document all these things.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons that Scientology was an attack point, an attack vector, was that we were practicing medicine at one point. And I kind of want to say, well, it's not medicine that we're practicing. There's things that are done that happen to have medical results, right?
Right.
But there's not a documentation of this, and there needs to be. There needs to be kind of like, here's a case study where this man had, you know, something that would today be treated with probably dozens of pills, and saying, you know, we don't know what's wrong with you. Let's do an MRI, CAT scan, whatever, wasting all this time and money, probably $25,000 just to get a diagnosis of you're screwed. You know, take this pill for the rest of your life. Whereas with 25 hours or less of Scientology counseling, and I don't know if you remember the process or not that was run, this was handled forever.
Yeah.
And it was a side effect. We weren't going for, or at least I don't believe they were going for a medical thing. It was just to get you some kind of relief, but it worked. Now, I myself, as an auditor, as a book one auditor, there was a woman who came in. She only spoke Portuguese, and I speak Spanish, so I was able to communicate, but it was kind of rough. This woman for 30 years had this nagging cough that every 2 sentences, this little like nervous tick.
Yes.
And I cured. I wasn't going for a cure. I was just trying to get to the point of what the heck is this? With book one, got to the basic incident, and it was gone permanently. Something that she had experienced for 30 years, and it was part of her. Like, it was just part of me. Gone. And I'd see her again. No thing. So there is, and I think it's our fault, there is a need to document this kind of stuff and bring it out to the public. And we didn't, as a group, do a good enough job of documenting these types of things. Because if we can maybe not replace medicine or psychiatry, but add our techniques, I think we'd have a much better outcome in both healthcare, physically and mental health. So that's my little rant. So thank you for sharing that, because this is part of the documentation I'm trying to do of like, let's get these stories, because we need to document some of the miracles that happen with this technology. Excuse me.
Right.
My saliva is running out. I'm talking too much.
Right. Oh, by the way, the process that keyed that out was the help process, two-way help, two-way OW help.
Two-way OW help. You have a spectacular memory, I gotta say. That's fantastic. I'm actually gonna write that down. Two-way OW help. So amazing. Any other big wins like that you want to share? Because you've experienced the real tech, right? Because you were there back in the days before things got corrupted. And it seems like today the wins are a little bit different. And I'd like to hear more of your, the things that you experienced.
Well, I think the next big one was on power processing, and that was in 1965. I was working in the manor when he started that program, and I got my power processing because I signed the contract, the staff contract. My auditor was Virginia Dansborough, whom many people loved, quite rightly. She was active for many years until a very old age. Anyway, I remember she audited me up in the lodge, the lower lodge of the manor. And I remember after one session, I'd had a few days of auditing by then. I came down the drive to the manor, and it was like my belly was exploding with happiness.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, power processing is barely delivered, if it's delivered at all.
Yeah.
It's incredible how this amazing piece of tech is just like, no, doesn't exist. I don't get it.
Neither do I, but I'm not technically qualified to answer that question. But there's another one around the same time, if I can interrupt you again.
Go ahead.
In my duties with L. Ron Hubbard in the manor, I would see him every morning. He would call down when he woke up, which could be anything from 12 o'clock, which was very early, that's 12 noon, until 5, which was usually late. But he would ring down and I would take him out a cup of chocolate. And he would drink his cup of chocolate at the little table at the bottom of his bed, and he'd talk to me. He'd occasionally ask questions and he'd occasionally let me say something, but he talked a lot. And I was quite happy to listen because it was always very interesting. But anyway, he made a habit of telling me what was going on in the research that he was doing. And at that time, that particular time, he hadn't got quite as far as the clearing course itself yet. He was researching end words.
Yes.
And he was locating, or he had found some incident or other that had a lot of end words. And he told me one day, he knew my interest in music. He told me one day, he said, that the subject of music is covered by end words. And he gave me 5. He told me 5 of the end words. I just kind of acknowledged, I wasn't terribly, he wasn't auditing me.
Right.
It didn't introvert me. Just like it was just a comment that he made. Yeah. And I really didn't think about it much, except that he had told me that the end words always come in pairs. So the next morning I see him and I remind him about what he told me. And he said, and I said to him, what's the pair? What's the missing one? And he got up from his little table, went over to his desk by the window, where he had a meter set up. That's where he did his research. And he put himself on the meter with his back towards me. And he was searching for the N word to go with the one that
the dangling one.
The dangling one, correct.
Right.
Thank you. And he was doing it out loud. And I'm standing there behind him, and I'm saying to myself, it's X. I have a word, and it's X. And suddenly he says the word X, and obviously he gets his blowdown. He says, it's X. So the next thing, he turns around, and he starts a little bit, and he says to me, you could make yourself sick standing there listening like that. So I brushed it off. And he like, oh no, and then he said, well, I guess it's been in Restim a good long while. Anyway, that was that. There was nothing very significant about it, at least between us. But, you know, for the next several days, I was running around the manor, and I was always very busy. I was running around the manor, and something feels different, very strange. But probably the next day, I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is what they mean when they say I'm walking on air. I was walking on air for days.
And what happened technically was you were behind him, you thought the N-word, so you got it. He got it as well, indicated by the blowdown on the meter that it was the right item, and that produced a change in your case, even though he was the one on the cans. Pretty incredible. Pretty incredible.
Yes.
And these are the stories that I want to capture, because we need to get back to this.
Yeah.
We need to get back to these kind of wins. So overall, we have a lot of viewer questions. We might get to them today. We might not. I think maybe we're going to probably, like as you suggested, do a couple of these calls, right?
We'd be happy to.
Great. So that way we always have good energy, and you know, we're not tired, and we can also get to all the questions that we have from the viewers. This is one of my questions, and this is, I guess, another kind of a broad one, but do you feel overall that LRH kept his promise and that the tech does what he says it will?
Yes. As you noticed, I have a little reservation. I think my opinion is that he produced a lot that's extremely relevant. It's very true, very necessary, very helpful, and very kind towards humanity as a whole. And not only that, he developed the discipline of application, which made the delivery possible. Now there was LRH the Hightoned and LRH the Lowtoned. Two of them were always there. In the earlier days, the high-toned LRH was more in evidence. But there were some of the low-toned along with that. As he aged, the lower-toned LRH came more to the fore. And the higher-toned LRH was, I think, always present, but not so forward. So I think what he produced, the best of what he produced, ranks with the best any spiritual leader has produced in the history of mankind. And I look at it this way. There are people like Jesus Christ and the Buddha. They pointed us to a certain path without full awareness that across this path was a gate. And I think people like the Christ and the Buddha, they hinted at how we could get through the gate.
Mm-hmm.
But the gate has a key. It has a lock. And I think the one who provides the key to that lock is LRH. And to put it very simply and basically, the key to that gate is as-isness. And so far as I know, LRH is the first one to identify that key and to make it possible for any human being to help another use that key. So the best of his work is, as far as I'm concerned, right up there with the best of all of them.
Right. Which is pretty profound. It's a profound
Mm-hmm.
statement. And you verbalize something which, you know, I've always felt, which you put it nice and concisely, whereas despite the flaws and despite the low tonedness and the stuff we've all heard about the man and you've personally experienced, no one else has been able to provide the answer. Hints, roundabout ways, but he cuts through it all.
Yes.
Now, knowing that, how do we explain his later years where everything kind of just fell apart? I don't know exactly what year, but you know, with the Guardian's office fiasco, Quentin Hubbard dying, Mary Sue basically not living with him for the last, I don't know how many years, him dying isolated from his family and ceding control of the church to Miss Cabbage, who we pretty much all can't stand. So how do we justify his ability to come up with basically the perfect path to spiritual freedom with the calamities and disasters that ended up happening?
I think things got a bit too much for him. I think we could go right back to the very beginning when he produced Dianetics. I don't think we can blame him for what I would call now a mistake that he made then, because he didn't have experience of the kind of activity that he got himself into. But if you recall the tape and the bulletin about the auditing comm cycle, the auditor's comm cycle begins with a very small cycle, but important one, and he has to look at, or she has to look at the PC and decide, is this PC ready for what I'm about to say,
right,
for the command or the question? Now, as I said, you can't blame him for not knowing that he should have asked that question, but if he had asked himself the question, is mankind ready to receive Dianetics? And found a good answer to that question, a good gradient to get into, then things might be very different. But he didn't. And he he chose part of the way he presented Dianetics came from the lower toned run. If you look, for example, at how Dianetics, the modern science of mental health, is written, he's written to make it sound like he's an academic authority, or he's equal to any academic authority. That he has that language and that pomposity, which is just complete nonsense, and it exposes him as being a bit foolish.
Yeah.
But he learned better as he went along. But I think events destabilized him in the 60s. There was, for example, in the, I think, 63, there was the Look magazine article. And a team of journalists and photographers from Look visited him at St. Hill, and he felt he had charmed them and given them a very good article to write. And then the article came out and it trashed him. Now, by the time I got to know him in 64, he'd got over that. But I still think it was a shock. But the big thing that really destabilized him was, I think, the fact that in 65, he went to South Africa. And while he was in South Africa, in Rhodesia, he tried some political game.
Right.
And the government there kicked him out. And one of the repercussions from that unhappy experience was that I think in 66, the following year, when he had to apply to the British Home Office to renew his permit to live in England, they refused. So he lost his home.
I wasn't fully aware of that, yeah.
And his stable location, his safe place from which to operate was gone.
And that was St. Hill.
St. Hill, yes. So he got pushed into whatever he got pushed into, and out of that came the Sea Org. And I think that it pushed him personally out of Valence. Because the importance for him after he was kicked out of England was, it first manifested in the policy letters which set up the Guardian's office, or the Guardian, the post of the Guardian and the Guardian's office. Now that was all attack. The best defense is an energetic attack.
Right.
And when somebody attacks Scientology, you go for their misdeeds. That's an upturn position to be operating from.
Sure.
I believe, I really don't know that it's true, but I think he got knocked into some kind of R6 valence.
You're the first person that said that, and it's brilliant. Because that seems to be that line of demarcation. But I never spotted that it was after the Rhodesia incident where he lost his stable, safe spot. And it's almost like he's like, all right, so these guys want to play. Let me pull out from all of my valences. Let me pull out this galactic patrol thing with the insignia and the star and the reefs, and I'm going to be a general or a commodore or whatever, just
Yeah.
like I was, because that was very effective for me in the past.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kick some booty, and we're going to switch the valence to one of utter toughness, excuse me.
Yeah.
And seemed to go in a dwindling spiral from around that point.
Where else would it go?
Right. And one thing that I'd always said to myself as well is like, nobody assigned this man a condition.
Exactly.
If you don't assign a condition, you get it. So
Yeah.
nobody said, hey, Ron, you are being at least treasonous as the head of this religious order, or at worst, confused as to what your role is and your valence.
Yeah.
Now, he probably would have chopped all of our heads off to assign that, but I think it needed to be assigned, regardless of whether he agreed or not, because look at what happened to the church and all of us. We are definitely in lower conditions as a group. I mean, we barely exist anymore, which is ridiculous. We have all this technology, and everyone blames this and that and whatnot. But Ron is responsible for his own condition, and he created this thing. And I'm not trying to say I blame him, because I'm an ally and I consider him a friend. But sometimes you need tough love, and sometimes you need to point out uncomfortable truths. And I think when Ron went out of valence, and then, for example, he got injured on the ship. I'm sorry, on land, and you are familiar with the terrible run that resulted from that in pain. I'm like, why didn't he apply PTS tech and assists to himself? Because apparently he didn't do anything except bitch in a chair and make everyone miserable. I'm like, right there, that's a condition. Treason for not wearing your hat and not applying your own technology. There's a bunch of missed opportunities to rectify the man, and that's kind of where I see things going off the rails with Ron himself. And him, he pulled in plenty of crap. We talk about pulling stuff in. I'm like, he pulled in a lot of stuff. So at one point, there should have been like, hey man, you can't always just blame the people around and the phantoms and the BTs and whatever. It's like, at one point, you got to take responsibility for the mess that you've created. And to this day, no one's nailed him for it, and he needs to get nailed. So I'm like, my opinion. What do you think about what I just said?
Well, I think life has nailed him.
True.
But I think you're absolutely right. It was all part of the package that everybody around him was in awe of his abilities, of his energy, and his strength. And we all revered him for the best that he had produced.
Correct.
Now, I'm not claiming this as any excuse, but it made it very difficult for us to call him out.
Sure.
And he played on that, I believe, in making himself the Commodore and all that stuff about command intention and so on.
Yeah.
So I, as his personal communicator, I'm certainly one of the most responsible for not calling him out and not inviting him to get back to Scientology. It's not that I hid from him. I'm not trying to make justifications, but this is what happened.
Yeah.
I did not hide from him that I'd lost confidence in him when we were together on the ship. And it really did surprise me that he never called me out on that.
How did you express that to him?
there were certain things I did not push for him. And there was one time, for example, when he came back from New York and he was setting up the musicians. They had been going several weeks. And as far as I'm concerned, they were just a total pest. I didn't enjoy the noise they were making, but that's just my personal taste. Anyway, he was working with them, and I was doing nothing. And one day he came out of his office to go out on the deck for a breather, and that took him past the door to my office. And he stopped and spoke to me, and he was speaking about the musicians. And he said to me, "I sure could do with your help." And I took my life in my hands. I just looked him in the eye, and I said nothing. And he turned and went out on the deck. And he never said to me, "What's going on?" There was another time. He tried a number of times to get me between him and Mary Sue. And I was having none of that. That was a fight. There was no way anybody could win that fight. Why? For the very simple reason, she could keep him awake all night. I couldn't fight that. So there was one time, oh yeah, he was having trouble. He thought he was having trouble with the geo. So he said to me, I was to get someone from St. Hill, bring him to the ship, train him up to be an LRH com, and then send him back to the LRH com Guardian's office worldwide. And I looked at him and I'm thinking to myself, how fucking stupid. How is this going to work? Mary Sue's right here on the ship. And she can override the LRH com anytime she wants to. And the whole GO can be busy undermining the fellow. And she won't say a word against it. So eventually we did pick someone. We brought him to the ship. And I had him trained up. He graduated. And I sent him back to the GO worldwide with a set of orders to take up his post. And the first thing he had to do, of course, was to go to see Jane. But again, I took my life in my hand and I sent him back without telling the Commodore. So, of course, he went back to St. Hill, the poor guy. He went to Jane, who wanted to know what the hell was going on. And she, of course, got in touch with Mary Sue. And she and Hubbard were down having their dinner one day. And the messenger comes up to me and he says, "Did you send this fellow back to worldwide?" And I said, "Yeah." Expecting all hell to break out. I expected I'd be cleaning the bilges in 5 minutes' time. Nothing was said. No messenger came back. And when the two of them separated after their meal, he was joking with her about something. And he came up the stairs, past my office and into his office, and he didn't mention this thing at all, ever again. But I was expecting to be called in on the carpet, and then I would have said my piece. But he didn't call me in. And I never said my piece. As I said, we revered him. Well, I guess you could say we Q&A'd.
Sure. and it's understandable, and I'm not trying to like, it's not a blame thing. It's just I really want lessons to be learned.
Yeah.
You are a walking history of Scientology. You know, you have
Some of it.
a lot of information. So I'd like to capture this, that moving forward, whoever becomes leader has got to be, there needs to be transparency, first of all, which is lacking, and accountability, even for the leader.
It all starts with ethics.
Right. And especially transparency. So not so much of the secrecy or secret deals like some kind of NSA, CIA, FBI operation, which there's another Valence that the church went into, but more of like, you know, we're a group, we're composed of individuals with all of our flaws and whatnot. We make mistakes, but here's the deal, and let's fix them. And I'm sorry, but our leader, whoever she is or he is, whatever, at the moment, you look at the stats. If we're going to manage by statistics, look at the stats. It's not a personality cult. We have to do something about it because that's even in our policies. So again, it's hard because it's almost like I've always said, like, it's that the reactive mind's trying to clear the reactive mind, and it just gets weird and messy, right? So there's gonna be goofs and mess ups, but with stories like yours and more people talking about what happened and talking about future plans, we can turn things around, and that's really what I want, and I'm sure you want that too.
Absolutely.
There was never, so there was never a confrontation with Ron. I'm assuming there was never a like a let's hash it out. I guess there was just more and more distance created between you simply because you weren't blindly following his orders. Is that a correct assumption? As far as how you did mention, you kind of, there was a point where he like you were no longer that close.
It was very clear to him that I had lost confidence in him.
Okay.
And generally speaking, once he received that kind of indication from anybody, that person was gone.
Right.
However, I wasn't gone. And I didn't know quite how to deal with that. And again, I'm not trying to make excuses, but I've never been a person with a lot of self-confidence. So there were things that just didn't occur to me to be or do because I had that view of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only many years after I left the ship and Scientology that I realized that I did have ethics presence with L. Ron Hubbard. I did. I can see it now. I could see it later, but I never knew I had it. And it didn't ever occur to me that I might have. But that was an expression of his authority over all of us. And that authority persisted because of our reverence for him and admiration. That's the basic postulate.
Gotcha. Okay. So overall, if you were to describe to somebody who LRH was, or if there was a way you would want him to be remembered, how would you describe that? I guess the question is, how would you like LRH to be remembered?
I'd like him to be remembered as the man who found that key and devoted his life for some years to making that key available to everybody. And that to me shows a level of generosity equal to the other spiritual masters that I mentioned. They they all have in common an extreme generosity that knows no limit. The Buddha said, love yourself today, tomorrow, always. How generous is that? He's giving us all permission to love ourselves. And Christ said, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. How generous is that? Everybody. Everybody who's merciful will obtain mercy.
Right.
It echoes. I'm not a Christian, but there's good stuff in all these things.
Sure.
Sometimes I sometimes wonder if there isn't sometimes better than Scientology. But I think it was St. Peter who is said to have said, of silver and gold have I none, but what I have I give unto you.
Mm.
And that was Hubbard's attitude at his best, at his highest tone.
Sure.
Now, the lower tone, Hubbard wanted a lot of money for it. He got it.
All right. So I'm going to go right to a viewer question right now, kind of tying into what you just said. I want to acknowledge you for what you just said. That was great. And I agree with you as far as spiritual masters of the world. It definitely needs to be included in that Parthenon or Pantheon, whatever the word is, of great spiritual leaders, which is not widely recognized yet, but I'm sure it will be. So moving on, and related to the kind of low tone and high tone L. Ron Hubbard, we have a few questions from viewers which are borderline conspiracy theory. So do what you will with them, but I'm going to ask them, and some of them are kind of funny. But here's a viewer question: did Ken ever come across anything odd that made him wonder if there was more than one L. Ron Hubbard, whether at St. Hill or on the Apollo, or that he was
never.
Okay,
never.
Yeah, that's a wide thing in the field. That in 1972, the CIA kidnapped them, replaced him with a body double, and I'm just gonna nah. Okay. I guess a similar question. I'm just gonna read it, and then I think we have the answer already. Can he shed light on the Morocco mission and villa before LRH's departure to New York in '72 that would refute the books and articles claiming that Hubbard was kidnapped or killed? I'm not sure what the question is.
I didn't get all of that.
Yeah. I'm going to read it again. If we can't answer it, we're just going to skip it. But can he shed light on the Morocco mission and villa before LRH's departure to New York in 1972 that would refute the books and articles claiming that Hubbard was kidnapped or killed? So I guess he wants to know about the Morocco mission before LRH's departure to New York in '72. Do you have any idea what that question is referring to, really?
He was not, I think we can say categorically that he was not kidnapped and he was not killed. There's stuff I can say about the Moroccan mission, but maybe that's another time.
Yeah, let's skip that. So nothing that you saw that he was involved with the CIA. I think I know where it was getting to, that he was involved with the CIA or any secret government projects.
Not that I know of.
Okay, that's a whole nother. People go down these rabbit holes, and even well-meaning people, just but I think their information is a little suspect. So you never saw any intelligence type of operation or any indication that LRH was somehow working in with the government to develop Scientology for their use.
Seems ridiculous to me.
Agreed. Okay. Next question. Are are the OT levels we have in the free field true to the levels he knew from when they were originally written? So I guess we'd have to suppose that you know what OT levels are out in the field right now, and whether they were true to form. Any answer to that?
Well, I guess you'd have to look at the pieces of paper. There were many Xerox copies going around when I was active in the field, and they were accurate. They were Xeroxes of material I'd seen myself. Other than that, I can't answer. I don't know what's there. I don't know what the person's looking at.
True. Okay. As I'm reading them, I'm kind of realizing I probably shouldn't ask them, but I'm going to go for it anyways.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of the OT levels, maybe you can answer this long-standing query that I have. So he says we can make OTs, Philadelphia Doctor course. He's pretty much describing these phenomena, et cetera, et cetera. Comes out with the original OT levels. We got up to original OT7. Those are the OT levels. This is what makes, an OT by definition. All of a sudden that's gone. And now we're talking about the OT3 stuff. What in the world happened? How do we go from the drills that were apparently to enhance our perception and do these things and intention to all of a sudden that's gone without any HCOB that I've ever seen saying we are replacing these levels with this, and here's why. How do we go from those original OT levels to the solo knots bridge? Can you share that?
Right. Well, as I remember, the original OT levels up to 5 included what was always OT3.
Okay.
You did OT. OT1 was a drill.
Right.
No. OT1. You did the clearing course. And you did. That's right. You did some. I'm forgetting something. I have gaps here.
That's fine.
But you did the clearing course. Then you did OT, what became known as OT2. I remember. I don't remember doing anything in between in my day.
Mm.
And then the next thing was OT3. Then there was OT4, which changed several times. Then OT5 and OT6, which were drills, and they didn't change. And the next major change was around, I think, the early 70s, when he introduced OT7, which was the beefing up of intention, which the person did, and then the person redid OT3 with a beefed up intention and got more stuff, and then that was called OT3X.
Right.
Okay. Now, I was not really on any tech lines after that, so the next thing I know about is the nut. And that was 78, 79, I think.
If you were to look at, with your knowledge of the old stuff and the new stuff, what would the proper sequence be? Would it be your OT1 after clearing course? Well, actually, nobody does a clearing course anyways now. That's another whole other thing. So let's assume you're clear somehow. OT1, OT2, OT3, the original and standard OT3. Then the OT4 drug rundown, the regular 5 and the 6, and then solo knots, or would you stick the old OT levels anywhere in there, like the old OT7?
Well,
do they have any place in the modern bridges, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think that would be up to the CF.
Okay. So that would be case dependent. It wouldn't be like the grade chart, the earlier grade chart where everyone is programmed for 0, 1. Okay. All right. I've gotten several answers on that. It's good to have another perspective. Is there any part of the tech that you feel isn't of great value, or that you'd had a failure with, or you didn't quite gel with you?
That's the PTSSP. I can understand the PTS part, but the SP and the handling of the SP, I never got.
Okay.
I know I can see that he definitely had a problem with people whose lives were being continuously disrupted by another person who was antagonistic and abusive. But and in order for the abused person to continue, say, in the chair or studying, there had to be a separation.
Sure.
That's perfectly clear. But to say that everybody who's doing this to a Scientologist is a suppressive person, and that it implies that they're all equally suppressive. But there's a category of person called suppressive person, and the thing you do with this category of person is you disconnect, or you try to handle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the handling aspect went out with Miscavige, if not before. I don't think he ever thinks about that. But I had a problem with it, and the problem was partly personal, because I could have had my father declared SP very easily. And he would have had everything that I could have said about his behavior come out.
Sure.
Now, he was emotionally and verbally abusive, very rarely physically abusive, but it certainly wasn't sexually abusive. But it would have been immediate. And I would have been forced to either handle or disconnect. From the ship, I couldn't have handled. But I was not going to disconnect from my own father, no matter how nasty I thought he'd been. And I think he was very nasty. Poor man, he was very sick. But I just felt that my father was, and my relationship with my father was my business. And if it was not good, too bad. It was up to me to handle it and get by. It was affecting me as I saw it and still see it, in that it affected my self-confidence.
Mm-hmm.
I left home with the symptoms of what they now call complex PTSD. And that includes the feeling of worthlessness.
Sure.
It also, the list, it's not a very long list, but the list also includes suicidal thoughts. Well, it sometimes occurred to me that might be a solution when I was living with my father, but when I seriously considered it, I knew it was not something I could do. So I didn't have that symptom. But I think basically what I felt was that if life puts a big plate of shit right in your face, and the thing you have to do is to lick it clean. And you don't lick it clean by disconnecting.
You confront it.
You confront it. Now, of course, being on the ship and away from my father, I was not confronting it, except that I can say that all my life I've been getting towards a point where I could confront it.
Yeah.
And I got there in my 60s, where I could let go.
Gotcha.
But it was that all was part of my life, and it wasn't something I could cut off. Even though I was on the ship, even though I was L. Ron Hubbard's personal communicator, and working right across the ship from Mary Sue Hubbard, I wasn't going to toe that line of throwing my father overboard. I just couldn't do it.
Was LRH as strict or as demanding with this connection, and just kind of as harsh as we've come to be now in the main church, or was it just like, no, your PTS, disconnect, or was there more a gentle approach?
That's an interesting question, because with people who were close to him, that he was in contact with daily, he was always gentler and kinder. But if the person who was annoying him or who had upset him was lower down on the decks or off the ship somewhere, he could be very harsh very quickly.
Gotcha. Yeah. So ARC triangle there. Infinity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So anything else? PTSSP tech, which, admittedly for me, the first thing that always kind of bothered me until I really got it was conditions. I think because they were misapplied. It's like, write these stupid things out like an admin exercise, and magical thing is going to happen. It never did. I finally cognized on how they work, at least for my use. And then PTSSP was also another big one, because it's, again, I saw it done so poorly and so harshly, and even I, as an Esto, I was a trained Esto.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, basically an HCO. It's a your own walking HCO. I used to do a lot of ethics cycles, and some of those, I'd go for the more, I thought, humane approach, and just get nailed by my seniors. They're like, no, this guy's got to write a letter and send it off, and I'll be like, this stuff sucks. This isn't helping anybody. But then later on, cognitive, basically what you're just trying to do, it is my interpretation, is allow someone to reach again, to have, like, what an SP really does is make you small, make you make you withdraw. So just gentle gradients to get somebody causative and be able to reach and see and have. And that's when I started to understand that tech a little bit better and apply it to great results. Like now I do PTSD.
Right.
It's just like people win, as opposed to,
Yeah.
no, you got to do this and create a situation. So yeah, I kind of shared that issue with PTSSP tech. It took me a while to get it. And one of my biggest cogs and biggest wins was realizing that my biggest PTS item was the church. And that happened, 12 years ago or something like that. And I was like, why am I PTS? Because my bridge is gone. I can't have it. That's a pretty nasty thing to do to people. So once I found the field and I found Trey Lots, who audited me in the L's and whatnot, I was like, no longer PTS. I can have it again. You know what I mean? So again, it's kind of like, can you reach? Can you have it or not? And then that helped me understand. So I understand how it could have taken you into your 60s to finally get a handle of what was going on with your dad. And thank you for sharing that. I know it's a personal story, but it's helpful. And I think people will benefit from knowing, hey, it takes time sometimes, and it should go. It's a personal decision, and you can't mandate that somebody do something like that where it's so deeply personal. And that's why the church right now has so much hate towards it, because they enforce this policy of disconnection, still doing fair game. I mean, that's to separate families.
Yeah.
It's just disgusting.
Repulsive.
It's horrible. So that's one of the things that until they fix that and reverse that policy or stop doing it, they're never going to make friends. Speaking of that, what do you think will really need to happen moving forward to get Scientology working again? And you can answer this from the point of the fixing the church, or just independently, or the whole broad spectrum. What do you think is going to, what's it's realistically going to take to get us back on track?
I don't know. I think a very important question is going to be, when the time comes for any exchange between the church in general and Scientology, independent Scientology. The question is going to be, how many of the people currently in the CFS are operating sincerely as Scientologists despite senior management?
Yeah.
If there are any, and I'm sure there are, those people are very valuable, and they should not be thrown out with the rest of the bathwater.
Sure.
Apart from that, I think that Scientology will survive through what people who are trained retain, either in this lifetime and maybe beyond. How much of that will be available to them in succeeding lifetimes? Because I think that what is real to people in their hearts is what is valuable and will come out in the future as Scientology in one way or another. As to any decisive change or movement with regard to management of the church, I don't see any in sight.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not on all the necessary and relevant comm lines.
Sure.
I don't hear of any. I don't know. I have no idea how Miscavige will end up. No idea at all. And of course, as long as he's where he is, then there's no comm line to him or into the church from outside.
Right.
As regards how the independent field might become more active and better thought of, that I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay.
Nobody has come forward who seems to want to lead the independent field, or whom the independent field is accepting as a leader, either a single person or a number of people. I personally think a number of people would be better. They say government by committee is useless. I agree, but government by dictatorship is also very bad, or can be very bad.
Right.
And interestingly enough, I think Ira Chaleff has indicated one path that should be followed. He wrote a book called Courageous Followership. in which he has a very active group based on his teachings, in which he argues that anybody who's in charge needs to have around him a team of people who will hold him accountable and call him out and say you're making a mistake.
Right, as we discussed earlier. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And interestingly enough, that reminds me, in 1965, when I said to LRH that I would like to move over from the household into the organization, he was very happy about that. And before I did actually move, he gave me a couple of briefings. And one time he said to me, I was going to be LRH St. Hill. He said to me, one of your hats will be to prevent me making a mistake. Now that impressed me.
Interesting, yeah.
I thought this is honest. He was quite. It was kind of very ordinary for him. He said it in a very straightforward manner. It wasn't like he was putting something on.
Yeah.
Which he could do, but didn't usually do with me. So I accepted that. But then, of course, when I was CS7 on the ship, I found out that he did not want to be told about his mistakes. He made that very clear.
Really?
Yes.
He flat out said,
I put my foot in that.
My God. So many missed opportunities. I know that I think it was Otto Ruse who said that he went through LRH's folders and whatnot, and there's a large amount of unhandled, like, out lists and bypass charge, and LRH was never handling that. Imagine if he would have been handled.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Things could have been so much better. So for whoever is the future of, pretty much any organization, take this as a lesson. Transparency, accountability is a must. And if you're going to take care of your leader, that includes calling them out when they need to be called out. Even if they throw a fit, throw a phone at you, tomatoes, rotten cabbage, because or else it gets crazy. And I think
I'm pretty sure that if I had said to the messenger on duty outside his office, will you tell the Commodore I want to speak to him? He would have called me in at once, and I could have said something like, I think you're making a mistake, or I think we're going in the wrong direction. There's a 50-50 chance that he would have just sat and listened.
Right.
There's a 90% chance that he would have blown up and thrown me down to the bilges. But if he had done that, there's a very good chance that he would have called me up the next day and he would have said, very characteristically, I've been thinking about what you said. And then there would have been a conversation.
Yeah.
But I had the opportunities to do that and I let them go.
Well, let's say LRH was in front of you right now and you had the chance to just express yourself and tell him what you needed to tell him. What would you say?
It's a bit late.
Well, take it as a PT thing. He's literally right now, 2022.
Yeah. I would say to him, straighten out your ethics. Don't do anything else, but straighten out your ethics. There's a very interesting thing that the Buddha said. It was in the same passage as the one I quoted earlier on. He was talking to his monks, and he was telling them, love yourself and watch. That would be meditate. Love yourself and watch today, tomorrow, always. He said, first, establish yourself in the way, then teach, and so defeat sorrow. And he said, but before you straighten the crooked, you must first do a harder thing. Straighten yourself.
Yes. Very true.
Very.
And
He was very sharp with the Buddha. He was the sharpest human that ever lived. He had us all completely nailed.
do you believe that Ram was a Buddha part 2? In other words, the same being, or were they separate?
Well, I think he inferred that he was. He invited us to think that he was. And my opinion is that if he was, he'd forgotten a lot of what he knew.
Okay. Yeah, Hymn of Asia, where he basically says he's I forget the pronunciation of the word, Maitreya, I forget.
Yes, Maitreya.
Maitreya, yes. So kind of black and white there. But yeah, I do see a lot of the parallels between Buddhism and Scientology, but there's just that. But again, we talked about it today. After 65, that kind of an R6 valence shift of the whole thing.
Yeah.
The entire thing just went from, you don't punish people, it's a science. You don't believe anything which you don't feel is true. All these things which attracted me, and all of a sudden you go from that beautiful thing to like North Korea type of environment. It's like, what in the world? So there's that Buddhist truth is still there, and I think it's there in the early years, and we just have to fix what happened 65 on, and that seems to be the point of demarcation. That Sea Org weirdness started happening, but you kind of nailed it with pointing out that the instability caused by him getting kicked out of Rhodesia and then not being able to enter his home. I mean,
he did. Excuse me. He did get back into the UK, but then yes, but after some months he had to renew his permit,
and then he was kicked out.
And then they refused to renew it,
and he had to leave. Yeah. So that kind of explains. It doesn't excuse it, but if we're going to understand things, we need to know the circumstances. Okay, we have done today, apart from the about 30 minutes of technical setup, an interview of about an hour and a half. I think this is a pretty good point to take a pause. Do you agree?
Yeah.
And then I literally have a list here of 20 or 30 more questions we have to get through. By the way, where are you? Are you in Scotland? Are you in England? Where are you exactly?
No, I'm in Scotland.
Okay, cool. And that's where you're from originally?
Oh, that's a story.
Okay.
My father was Glasgow born and bred. My mother was from Edinburgh. They had my two elder brothers in Glasgow. He had to get a new job, which was in South Wales. So he moved the family there, and that's where I was born.
Okay.
But my blood and my name and everything else is completely Scottish.
Gotcha. And fortunately for me, your accent is very understandable.
Good.
I usually have a lot of trouble understanding the Welsh and Scots. It's very guttural, but you have a very, very pleasant accent. Okay, so we've talked about a lot. Amazing insights, Ken. I can't thank you enough. This is going to be very, very important. This is going to survive both you and I's bodies, I hope, and people are going to look back. I've always wanted to know, or I wish that there was video documentation of the people who hung out with Jesus or hung out with Muhammad, and that we could get their stories straight from their mouth, not written papyrus, which could be altered. We're getting the true firsthand accounts here, which is incredible, of one of the greatest people that knew one of the greatest spiritual leaders ever. So it's pretty important, and I can't express enough how much I appreciate you and the fact that you're willing to spend a few hours with me and tell your stories. And I know some
Uh,
of them are personal, and you're willing to go there, which is fantastic.
That's wonderful. That's very kind of you, Willie. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we'll continue our talk. I'll send you the Zoom link for Friday evening at 7 p.m. And we got a lot more stuff to discuss. So you guys who are watching, I mean, I'm going to edit these all into separate videos, but stay tuned for the next part because we're going to get even deeper. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Ken, thank you so much, and we'll be in touch for our next episode. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ken. Bye.